Hello and welcome to my a little bit later than usual Modern Horizons 3 set re-review. Usually I like to do these before I put out my set reviews for the new set. I did not have time to do that this time, but I still wanted to put this out before Bloomberg comes out next week. Because I don't know, I like doing them. It's you gotta hold yourself accountable, right? It is set review season. It's good to hold myself accountable for some of the grades I made that were not so good. Some of the grades I made that were really good in MH3. Also be talking a little bit about my feelings about the format overall, and just kind of we'll sort of be talking about what went on and all that as we get into the slides here. So we start off with the cards I got wrong, because that's what the people want to see. The people want to see me be wrong. They don't care whether or not I was right. Nobody does. That's the nature of the beast here. I get it. I'm that way too. And the first one is Indebted Spirit. So the thing with Indebted Spirit is that the reason I liked this card a lot is that it's basically Doomed Traveler, right? Like, on its face, it's a Doomed Traveler. And that's a good card, right? That's been a good card historically. I think it's still a good card. The problem is that this didn't really fit anywhere super well. And again, just Doomed Traveler on one. There wasn't really a deck. Like, there's not really a tokens deck in this set. There's not like a, sack deck, you know what I mean? There's usually in a set where this would be true, black white or maybe red white would want Indebted Spirit. The problem is that red white was very focused on energy, and black white was just kind of like, A, didn't have any sack outlets, and B, was focused on modified stuff, and this as a modified payoff was bad, whereas this is if it had been a 2 bodies or maybe even 3 bodies sack fodder generator, I think it would have been pretty decent. So I think there is some situational problems with this card. I do think that I underestimated the rate of how expensive. I overrated the bestow cards just in general. You're going to see several bestow cards on this list, and part of the reason that was the case is that I just overrated the flexibility of them. You basically never really wanted to play them without using bestow, right? That was kind of the thing, is it was the flexibility, but there really actually wasn't that much flexibility. And yeah, the modified stuff just wasn't functional. So I gave this a tier 2 grade. I ended up feeling like it was tier 4 at the end of the set. Muster the Departed has similar problems. The biggest problem with this is that this one I should not have graded as high as I did, and I kind of knew it at the time and just didn't bother to change it. This is something I'm doing differently in the future, and have been doing differently in my Bloomberg set review, which is when I am doing my grades and I'm actually doing and talking through them in the set review, I will actually go change them to be what I reflected. Because when I was grading this, even during the set review, I kind of knew that tier 2 was too high. The thing that I liked about this, obviously, is that it has, 3 mana for 2/1/1 flyers is pretty good, and I figured that was going to be something that could happen a high enough percentage of the time that this would be good. That basically just never really happened. There just wasn't a lot of trading 2-drop for 2-drop in this set, because the 2-drops just didn't, your opponent's 2-drops were probably something they didn't want to trade off. More so than an unusual set. You've Conduit Goblins, your Nightshade Dryads, those type of cards. Your opponent's just never blocking with those on turn 2. And so this just never does the thing on turn 3 of you trade off, then you play the... And your opponent's probably not supposed to block anyway. So again, that was just kind of a miss. And the Engine-y part of it, just, again, the making a bunch of tokens in this set, there was nothing to do with the tokens. You couldn't sacrifice them. You really couldn't just do anything with them. And so this card suffered as a result. Again, similar theme. You're going to notice a similar theme with some of these early ones here. Reform, a card that is really slow and has no stats. But the thing is, again, it's just there's not a single sack outlet in the set, be it below rare, that's playable. There's the rare one, but the black one and red, and even if there were, I don't think this would have been that great. It's just one of those things. It's one of those things, and I missed that. I was like, oh, if there's ever blue removal, this card just never does anything, because it doesn't die. Similarly, white removal just gets rid of it too, and it's There's also exile stuff. Like there's just too much stuff that interacted with this, and it was just way too slow, and there was no sack outlets, and it just you were never getting a 9/9, and even if you did, it probably wasn't even that good. So yeah, this one again, I think I just kind of was like way too optimistic about how doable this would be. Triton Wavebreaker. So similar to the other bestow creature, although this one ended up being worse. It just it just didn't really go anywhere. Like this was a very like MH3 was a very streamlined format. So you really wanted like all of your cards to be doing the thing you were doing, and this just didn't do anything. It just kind of never really like making a creature into a thing with prowess didn't matter, and this thing having prowess didn't matter either. So it just didn't have a deck that it played well in, and so it was just bad, basically. Even if there had been a deck that like theoretically wanted this, I still don't think it would have been very good. Just again, just it was just too small, like too low rate to be good in your just any deck. Like in 2024 limited, I think again this one was just like a basically took a complete bunt on this one. There was just no excuse here. I really shouldn't have gotten this one wrong. Draw's Claw. So Draw's Claw is interesting in that again, this was another one that is a casualty of me not updating my ratings when I was doing them because I would have moved this down to tier 3 probably. But again, you have to kind of like we gotta be honest here. These are the ratings I gave, and as a result, I have to they caused me to change my approach. Um, week 1 of the format, I would have told you this was unplayable. That ended up not being true. Later in the format, you could play it, and it wasn't like a complete disaster, but it's still not very good. Um, I think there was a place for it in certain decks, but really, like you just didn't need to play it, and your deck would probably be better off if you didn't have it in most cases. It just the the equipment was too expensive to reconfigure, and it didn't matter. Again, the no sack outlets thing, like this was like I kind of just didn't see that, and it was like a key component for why a lot of the cards I got wrong were wrong. Is there was just no way to use the multiple permanents. Like this being an artifact and also a creature basically didn't really matter. It being an artifact mattered, but being like two permanents wasn't that big of a deal compared to a lot of other sets. So one card I got wrong in the other direction. There's usually not a ton of these. Collective Resistance. So Collective, I just thought that this card would be too situational. We've seen these type of effects be not very good, and this one I didn't think that it would do it. So why this card was good in this format specifically is there were a lot of enchantments running around that you would, or artifacts that you actually, it's nice to have that type of interaction in your deck, and the fact that you could get like a 2-for-1 by like paying 1 green to like if your opponent casts a removal spell and then do this and then blow up their artifact. That was a thing that happened more often than I would ever have expected. I just thought that all of these modes were too overcosted, and that wasn't like when you combined them, that actually ended up not being the case. They were reasonably costed, and this was playable in any green deck. Path of Annihilation. So Path of Annihilation, it's rare for me to be this wrong on a card that was just so good from day one. The part of this card that I was right about was kind of the like casting something 7 or greater, gaining 4 life, like not mattering that much. Which I like I kind of like that was I focused too much on that part of the card is basically what happened. I was like making 2 things that you can't block with for 4 mana, and then you're probably not actually casting like that many. Like you're probably not actually gaining that much life off of this, which was true, but it turned out it did not matter because the amount of mana that you generated by playing this was just insanely high, and there were so many ways to spend your mana that this just generating 2 mana per turn for the rest of the game, and sometimes a lot of times more than that, was just plenty good enough to be a very very strong card, and just completely missed the fact that this I thought that the format would be fast enough that this card wouldn't work, but there was enough. It just was functional. It just wasn't that fast. And the final card I got wrong is Scurry of Gremlins. So this is interesting because, and obviously I got more cards wrong than this. These are just the ones that are like the most relevant with like for me to highlight. The reason I thought this card wouldn't be as good as it was is that 4 is a lot of energy to activate this, and like I was like, oh, you need to have 2 creatures in play to even activate this once. And I was like, how likely is that? And I was like, it's like somewhat likely, but you only activate it once, and then you're getting 2/2/1 hasters and pummeling your other creatures. And I was like, that's not that much damage. But there was a lot of cases where you would just play this, get like 8 energy, and just win the game. So yeah, it also, this card was a little bit deck specific, where like you did, like you couldn't necessarily just jam this in every deck. And it did need some help. So I, it was good, really good in your average red white deck. And I also, one of the things I missed with this too is I thought you would want to be using your energy elsewhere more often, but that just wasn't really the case. In a lot of games, you would have leftover energy just kind of lying around, especially if your deck was like good. So I think that this was actually a better place to use the energy than I thought it would be. And now on to the cards I got right. So Writhing Chrysalis, getting this one right. I don't really think there was a way to get this one wrong. I mean, I know there were people that did, but this one to me, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it just was kind of a slam dunk. It was net of 2 mana, make 3 bodies, make a 4. One of them is a 4/5 reach. You get to have a bunch of Eldrazi. It synergizes with every single card in the set. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't print a common that's this strong. So that's what happened with Writhing Chrysalis, and it really did define the format as a top 5 card, which again is probably not supposed to happen with your commons. It is an interesting thing to think about, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. How a common being one of the top 5 cards in the set changes draft strategy, but. So I'm proud of my grade on Static Prison. Getting this one right. So this one was very difficult to evaluate before playing with the set, for a couple of reasons. One of which is that, again, it's temporary removal. Now, it wasn't really temporary removal. It was pretty much permanent. You could, again, in good decks, you were just, never going to be out of energy to pay for this. But the thing is that even removing something for 2 turns for 1 mana in the mid to late game is just so much time that you're giving yourself to do something really powerful, and it's such a huge mana advantage that it didn't really need to do much. And this was just a strong card, and you could even play it in your non-energy white decks. It wouldn't be like the worst card to put in your non-energy white decks. Party Thrasher. So I graded Party Thrasher as tier 3. There was more hype around this card than this. It's another one of those cards that looks better than it is. And I think, again, this is another, people would probably still say that this is a tier 2 card or an above average card. I don't really feel that way. I was never really scared when I was against it. It obviously had the upside of filtering your draws to be a little bit better, but when you play this on turn 2, you don't really want to discard any cards. So it's not doing anything until turn 5. Just in terms, you can discard stuff, but you probably shouldn't in most cases. Which means that it basically is a 2-drop that has no ETB. Yes, you can cast non-creatures with Convoke, but that just never really came up. Obviously, I think it did come up for me exactly 1 time. I think I saw it happen once, so that did happen. But for the most part, that wasn't really doing anything. And it was just kind of a fine 2-drop that you didn't really want to prioritize super highly. Malevolent Rumble. This one was another one that I feel very good about my evaluation of. So just being somebody that likes Impulse, Impulse in DMU was a tier 3 card in my sort of opinion. This card is better than that card for several reasons. Getting a permanent in play, and also the permanent reducing the mana cost of future things is a thing. Getting 3 cards in your graveyard is really good. I think that this card just really proved that card selection is significant, and I mean, again, there's still going to be some like haters and doubters on Malevolent Rumble. They'll tell you that the card is not, is not just good. It is just a good card. It does have some issues with like like if you play like I did have a deck with 5 copies of this, and it was a little bit worse in that deck as a result. That deck had other problems, but yeah, it was an undervalued card until the end of the format. Not a card that was undervalued, Propagator Drone. So Propagator Drone was a fine card, but I think there was a lot of hype around this card in terms of, oh man, it's gonna like make all these huge creature tokens and do all the things. It's gonna take over the game, and that wasn't really true in most games. In most game states, for the most part, you would just play this on 2 and then it wouldn't do anything. Like that's what happened most of the time. There were some games where it did the thing and it popped off and you won. But I think the cost, like activating the ability on this almost never happened, and when it did, like it was good to have when it did, but that meant that the board was really stalled out, and then you were just kind of in top deck mode. So like an ability that's only for basically that exact scenario is obviously better than not having it, but is not super useful, and so I think this card was a little bit overrated until people corrected for it not being as amazing. Cursed Wombat. So, Cursed Wombat is a card that I put as an average card in my set review. Again, I watch a lot of other content and set reviews related. People were really hyped about this card. There are still people that believe this card is really good. I just don't see it. I've never seen it. I don't get it. To me, this card is really just a 2-mana 2/3 with no additional text on it. Like you can adapt, make it a like 5/6 or something. That's fine. But you're paying a total of 6 mana for a 5/6, which is not good. So like the adapting to mode, which I think people saw as like a thing you could do with this, was just never a mode that was good. Like if you were doing that, you were just asking to get like basically 2 for 1, because you made your thing huge and then you just get it removed by any removal spell ever. And the like having another thing that adapts and puts more counters on it did happen sometimes, but it required a lot of work, and it was just not super consistent. And I think like Tier 3 was exactly right on this card. If they reprinted this card in Bloomborough or whatever, like I think there was some set context that made this worse than maybe it could have been, but I just think that this card would probably have been overrated in any set that it was printed in, unless the removal was truly awful. And now we're going to get into my overall set rating. So I would give MH3 a 5 out of 10, an average grade. So I think the set was pretty average. So the main negatives that I have associated with the set are that the decks were very on rails when you were drafting good decks, for the most part. Obviously there was stuff you could do, there was cute stuff you could do, but Eldrazi, Energy, and like blue-black draw, those were kind of like the 3 main archetypes in the format by the end of the format, and they all were very, very similar. No matter, like, there were different cards, but they were like you drafted them basically the same, and the gameplay was very similar, and all that stuff. Chrysalis was a problem in the format. It was too good. It did dominate a lot of games. It did invalidate games on turn 4 sometimes. There were ways to answer it, and there will be, again, there's always going to be people that feel differently about cards and their impact on formats, because that's just the variety of experiences. But I do think that this card limited some scope of the format for me. Sealed was an absolute nightmare as a result. I think this is my least favorite sealed format of all time. I don't think I've played a sealed format I liked less. It's been a bad couple of sets for sealed because OTJ sealed wasn't great, and then this set was, again, I think my least favorite sealed set ever. I actually liked MKM sealed a lot, but sealed in this format felt like a complete nightmare. Do you know what? One of the worst parts about sealed in this format was you just had so many, like the fetch lands just don't play super well in sealed because you have like so many of them, and it's like, well, how many do I actually play? And do I want to play this? And you have to spend like 20 minutes figuring out your sealed mana base, which just is not. It's just not enjoyable. As much as I'm a mana bases are a fun guy, like the sealed mana bases were a nightmare. And you ended up with a lot of pools that were like, well, I have some energy cards and some Eldrazi cards, and I have some blue-black draw cards and some white cards, and I have some like aggro cards. I mean, it's like you were kind of your pool. Like a lot of my pools were all over the place, and I found myself in a lot of spots just being like throwing my hands up, whatever. So not my favorite sealed format of all time, to say the least. Some positives about the format. There were a lot of gameplay lines that were very intricate and interesting, and there was a lot of added complexity that makes people like drafting MH3, like Modern Horizon sets. There was a lot of stuff that you could do, maybe not necessarily like the best thing to do. Essence Reliquary sort of comes to mind as something that you could do, but probably wasn't the best. People will tell you it was the best. I don't think you can really make a super coherent argument that card is good. You can make a coherent argument that it functions well in decks that are built around it. So does every card in the game. So I don't like, to me that doesn't get you there. It's super fun. It's a fun card. A card that is actually good, and Chthonian Nightmare was a card that was my favorite card in the format by a lot. I loved that card. I loved playing with that card. I drafted it a couple of times, and I think I trophied both times with it in my deck. I think I splashed it in both of those cases. And you could just do some really cool stuff with Chthonian Nightmare. And I really liked that card, and it was sweet, and it was fun, and it was a good thing to do. But yeah, I mean, there was, again, just the intricacy and the overall ability to do cool stuff exists. Like, it definitely exists. Like, I know I said, like, oh, it's Energy, Eldrazi, Blue-Black. Those are kind of the decks. And I do feel that that's true to a large extent. But I also feel like you could, like, I drafted some other decks. They didn't feel super, like, interesting. They were kind of just a bunch of, like, good cards or whatever. But, yeah, you could do other stuff. It just kind of felt like you weren't really getting any type of edge, and just, I don't know, the play patterns didn't feel super fun after you kind of did them once. Like there was some cool discoveries you could make, and then you would do it once, and I'd be like, all right, now I'm kind of done. So this ended up being basically an average set for me. I don't feel like it was super great. I don't feel like it was super bad. Some positives, some negatives. Comes out in the wash. Give it a 5 out of 10. And that's my MH3 Set Re-Review. Nice quick one today. Quick little, short review before Bloombro comes out. And if you enjoyed, stick around. Maybe there'll be some more Bloombro content this time. I can't, obviously I got the early 17 lands data review that's going to be coming out week in, as I always do. And then, I don't know, I always, for the rest of the format stuff, it's always like, do I want to make stuff? Because I'm like, no one's going to actually care. Like, no one's going to care about the, like, draft gameplay. Because, that's how it is, and that's fine. But, see you next time.